Morning again, everyone. Good to see you. Frank, I think you were doing a pretty good Emerson impersonation there. Nice job. Not that I really ever heard Emerson speak, but So thank you again for, just before I get to the Transcendentalists, thanks again for all of you who have made a financial commitment to this congregation. And again, I just want to echo what Bev said at the beginning of the service, which is, if you have not yet made a pledge, if you have never made a pledge, but you identify with, you want to support and be part of what this religious tradition, which I'm going to talk about in a couple of seconds, and what this congregation stands for, I hope you'll make a financial commitment. We have put together a budget that is bold, that is larger than we've ever had before, because the world is demanding, it's crying out for us as religious communities, and especially progressive religious communities, to show up, to speak out, and to do more, to live our faith like we've never lived it before. So it is a great, great joy to spend some time this morning exploring transcendentalism with you. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that transcendentalism was one of the most important and influential spiritual, philosophical, and literary movements really in the history of this country. And its impact and influence traveled and travels well beyond our national borders. Now, look, I am no expert on the Transcendentalists, and I've only read a very small fraction of their voluminous, and I mean voluminous, writings. But I could easily take the next few hours, which I won't, talking about the impact their ideas and insights have had on my spiritual journey, and especially my journey as a Unitarian Universalist. You see, although I had heard of Emerson and Thoreau when I was in high school and maybe read a snippet or two in college, it was only after my spouse and I became Unitarian Universalists that I really delved into Transcendentalism. And what piqued my curiosity was the fact that many of the leading Transcendentalists were also Unitarians. Some, like Emerson, had even been Unitarian ministers. Now, of course, a number of those Transcendentalists, Emerson among them, became, how do I say this nicely, somewhat disenchanted with the Unitarianism of their day. Emerson once characterized the preaching he experienced at the Unitarian Church in Concord, Massachusetts. He once called that corpse cold. And let me just say with all heart that I certainly hope that's not how you feel when you leave the service today. Now, I can imagine you may be wondering why, if so many Transcendentalists criticized the Unitarianism of their day, why do you today quote them and even preach sermons about them? Well, the simple truth is that while Transcendentalism was inspired by, or was a reaction to, maybe I should say, the corpse-cold religion of the mid-19th century, over time, that critique took hold and transformed how Unitarians and today Unitarian Universalists understand theology and spirituality, religious truth and experience. The argument between Unitarianism and Transcendentalism is long over, and there can be no doubt that the Transcendentalists prevailed, and we UUs are, in my view, so much the better for it. Now, any discussion of the connection between Unitarian Universalism and the Transcendentalists has to begin with Mr. Emerson, the sage of Concord. Emerson was born and grew up in Boston, attended college and the divinity school at Harvard, and lived most of his adult life in Concord, which today is a busy and bustling suburb, but which in Emerson's time was mostly farmland and forest. While Emerson's father and grandfather had both been ministers and his mother possessed a keen interest in spiritual matters, he was most influenced by this person. Here she comes. That's his aunt, Mary Moody Emerson. And whenever I'm talking about Emerson, I like to talk about his Aunt Mary because she is someone who kind of goes nameless in history, but was a brilliant thinker. And so much of her nephew's thought came from his conversations and learning from his aunt. Emerson himself once called Aunt Mary the finest writer in Massachusetts and would have wholeheartedly agreed with one historian's later characterization of her as a vigorous theologian, an original religious thinker, and almost a prophet. Although maybe Waldo would have said, let's just get rid of the almost and call her a prophet. And one can certainly see Mary Emerson's influence throughout her nephew's work. She possessed a deep appreciation, and I would even say spiritual reverence for the natural world. And her love of nature led Mary Emerson to see truth and wisdom not simply in traditional sources like the Bible, but in everything and in every moment. Truth was found in the words and teachings of Jesus and in the sounds and movements of goslings on a pond near her home. Truth could be experienced, as her nephew once wrote, in the growing grass, in the bursting buds, and in the almost spiritual rays pouring forth from the night sky. And this understanding of religious truth led both Mary and her nephew to recognize the importance, the centrality of spiritual experience that is direct, unmediated, and yes, authentic. In her many letters to the young Emerson, Mary distinguished between the kind of religious life Emerson's father and grandfather had preached and a spiritual life that was so much more meaningful and deep. Far from the very intellectual and rational brand of spirituality one found in New England Unitarianism, Mary Emerson yearned for depth and connection, for experiences that enabled her to connect with truth and that would touch the heart and stir the soul. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, Emerson was a graduate of the Harvard Divinity School, and he was ordained as a Unitarian minister. But he only served a congregation for 3 short years before resigning to pursue writing and lecturing full time. Preaching apparently suited him, but he chafed at what he saw as the mindless adherence to tradition and ritual, including things like Holy Communion, that still characterized many Unitarian congregations at the time. Much like his aunt, Emerson yearned for something different, for an experience of a truth that was beyond the bounds of tradition, beyond the confines of dogma, beyond the bounds of all that stood in the way of that direct, unmediated personal experience of the divine. And if I could really point to just one idea, one contribution Emerson and the Transcendentalists have made to Unitarian Universalism, it would be their belief, their conviction that spiritual truth exists in every moment, that it is always unfolding, and that one must experience and discover that truth for oneself and accept it in one's own heart and mind. Truth is never the possession of one person, one sacred text, or one religious tradition. Truth was not revealed in only one moment of history or in one place in time. Truth lives in all people, in the bursting buds and in the night sky, in sacred texts, in religion, in art, culture, and science, in the whole human experience. Although the sources of truth are multifaceted and seemingly limitless, Emerson insisted that they all point in a single direction, and yes, flow from a single source. He believed that truth is ultimately the product of one will, one mind, one spirit. In the midst of all the variety of life, there is, in Emerson's view, an underlying unity. As he wrote some years after he delivered the Divinity School address, every chemical substance, every plant, every animal teaches the unity of cause and the variety of appearance. The unity of cause and the variety of appearance. So for Emerson, truth is about unity and diversity, transcendence and individuality, oneness in the midst of the blooming, buzzing variety of life. And it is experiencing and intuiting that combination of unity and diversity, oneness and variety that Emerson calls the religious sentiment. To be human is to seek, to explore, and to strive to live in harmony with the underlying unity of existence. And how does one do that? By paying attention, by experiencing the beauty and wisdom in nature, by listening to one's own heart and mind, and as Emerson famously said, as you heard a minute ago, by trusting thyself. But that experience, that connection, that understanding of spirit and truth cannot simply be learned like one would learn mathematics or a language. You can't simply read it in a book or listen to it in a sermon. Spiritual truth is an intuition. It is true because it speaks to our heart, our mind, and our soul. I simply can't receive the truth from another. I must experience it and know it for myself. Spiritual truth can't ultimately be taught. It must be caught. It cannot be dictated. It must be discovered. And directly discovering and experiencing truth is exactly what I think Margaret Fuller describes in her mystical moment with the sunlight beaming by the pool of water. After enduring yet another dull and deadening church service, she takes a long walk in the woods and encounters beams of sunlight among the trees. In that moment, she realizes that there is no self, and for the first time in her life, experiences connection to what she calls the all. As Fuller says so beautifully, in that moment she was taken up into God, dwelling in the ineffable, in the unutterable. I have to say that as much as I admire Emerson and Thoreau's beautiful and well-known descriptions of their spiritual experiences in nature, Margaret Fuller's speaks most closely to those moments in my life when I've experienced that deep connectedness to something greater than myself. And when I am blessed by one of those sacred moments, my breathing slows. The anxiety I always carry around with me calms, and all of my burdens just seem to fade into the background. As I stand on a beach looking out over a vast ocean, gaze up on a clear night at a seemingly infinite number of stars, or sing a moving hymn with all of you, I become lost in the best sense of the word, lost in the beauty of what I am feeling and experiencing. In that moment, as I think Fuller also experienced, there's no separation, no division, no us and them, me against the world. There's only beauty. There's only love. There is only connection as I awaken to the fact that I am part of that endless ocean, part of that awe-inspiring night sky, part of that beautiful hymn. Let me say a quick word about the transcendentalist use of the concept word God. I know that God can be, for some of us, maybe many of us, can be problematic and perhaps even hurtful, and may conjure images or ideas that look and feel very different from what Margaret Fuller experienced that day. While there can be no doubt that while the transcendentalists believed in the existence and the reality of something they frequently named God, they most certainly did not find God in doctrines, dogmas, or creeds. They didn't believe in a God who judges or excludes, who exists over and above humankind, or who looks like an old white guy with a long white beard. Instead, what the transcendentalists called God is that overarching and sometimes overwhelming sense of connection and oneness, a oneness that can take our breath away and that transformed in that moment the despair and anguish of Margaret Fuller into serenity, peace, and joy. Let me add that it was their insistence on seeing religious truth as an intuition rooted in our experience. That was one of the things that made transcendentalism so controversial in its time. Think about it. Claiming that spiritual truth is an intuition rather than a belief, that truth is found in experience rather than just in doctrine or scripture, that calls into question the absolute truth claims of religion, including, as Emerson said, the claims of what he called historical Christianity. In fact, Emerson had some pretty unkind words to say about the Christian tradition, and especially what he felt Christianity had done to twist and distort the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Boy, he'd have quite a headache today, wouldn't he? Listen to what Emerson says in the Divinity School address. This is somewhat inflammatory stuff. Jesus Christ belonged to the true race of prophets. He saw with an open eye the mystery of the soul, and he estimated the greatness of humanity. But what a distortion did his doctrine and memory suffer. He spoke of miracles, for he felt that life was a miracle, and he knew that this miracle shines daily. But the very word miracle, as pronounced by Christian churches, gives a false impression. It is a monster. It is not one with the blowing clover and the falling rain. Is it any wonder that Emerson was never invited to speak at the Harvard Divinity School again, and that the Divinity School address remained unpublished for quite a few years? And it is precisely transcendentalism's insistence on spiritual self-reliance and authenticity, and on the truth and wisdom that lives in every moment and in every living thing. It is those core convictions that inform Unitarian Universalism's understanding today of truth, of spirituality, and well, really of much of our faith tradition. Rather than dictating what you must believe or where your life's journey ought to take you, Unitarian Universalism celebrates who you are. When you come through those doors or join us for an online service, you don't have to put on a theological mask or pretend to believe or be someone you're not. We strive in everything we do to invite and inspire you to search and to grow, to question and to learn, and to develop an understanding of ultimate reality that is, above all else, meaningful for you. I know it may sound trite to say that the Transcendentalists bequeath to Unitarian Universalism the conviction that human beings should be themselves and trust themselves. But as Emerson and the Transcendentalists made clear, and as far too many still experience today, our authentic selves are not always who it is safe or acceptable or welcome to be. Think for a moment about all the voices and all the messages telling us who we are is not good enough, that we are a failure or a disappointment, and that we're going to be deservedly punished by an angry God or an unjust social order. Whether these voices are coming from those we know, perhaps those we love, perhaps those who we find ourselves in conflict with, or perhaps from political leaders or organized religion. Far too many people find themselves weighed down by a terrible burden of judgment that tells them that they aren't good enough or acceptable enough to be loved. I am so grateful and so happy that the transcendentalists called, I'm not going to use a very transcendentalist word here, bull you know what, on the conformity of their day, on the pressure to go along to get along, a conformity that seeks to control and dictate the human heart and conscience. And it is that clear and uncompromising acceptance and celebration of our true and authentic selves that is the most important legacy of transcendentalism, and it is at the heart, my friends, of Unitarian Universalism. Loving, accepting, and celebrating ourselves, loving, accepting, and celebrating others. That's the vision, and those are the values Unitarian Universalism seeks to affirm and promote. I don't know if living and sharing our vision and our values will convince people to become part of our faith tradition or this congregation. I hope it does, but ultimately, that's not really the point. Perhaps our core mission is to share a vision of life that puts love and authenticity at the center, and that is free from the fear, the judgment, and the exclusion that is currently doing so much harm. Perhaps our purpose is to let people know that no matter who they are or where they come from, there are people in this world who love and care for them. And perhaps our most sacred calling is to affirm in everything we do that for all the many challenges and struggles in our world, we are ultimately one human family, journeying together on this marvelous, marvelous planet that is our home. Amen. Thank you so much for listening, and blessed be.